In a domestic violence case, I encountered a guy claiming a 12 to 13-year-old was abusive. Many cases can be settled privately. This plea agreement is what we call a guilty plea. Most cases resolve through negotiation. We used to have sentences like 2 years, and we'd set it up so you'd have to spend about that time in a place like a prison, a correctional facility. Well, what do you do when there's no place to put them? Just release them early, right? They get out in 3 months, and people think it's no big deal. You keep going and commit another serious crime, but you don't get the death penalty because you didn't get a unanimous vote for it. For someone who seems extremely guilty, like someone who harms a dozen or 20 little kids, the reason for not reaching a settlement is that he just caught an alligator, beat it up, and then put it in his car, and that's how he got arrested. This story is quite plain, but I think at the moment the police opened the trunk, they probably weren't feeling very calm. They might have thought it was a kidnapping or something, wondering who would keep such a big thing in the trunk. My colleague said that a man attacked a peacock just to get its feathers, right? Well, some cases can't be discussed, especially those that are highly classified. Cases that are covered by the media are public records. As lawyers, we can't disclose the case information our clients give us unless it's a public record. Who are your clients? As prosecutors, we serve the government. Right, so we're not serving individuals, and we're not the victims' lawyers. The victims in our cases are considered witnesses. On attorney-client privilege, it applies to criminal cases, but the vast majority are public records. If you look for it, you can find it in the court records or wherever else, but most people don't bother. I imagine that prosecutors and district attorneys are supposed to serve the government, right? So when you said clients aren't allowed, I was thinking, isn't the client the government? Right, so if the government doesn't allow it, it's government information. We have to handle our work in the office.
You can't bring your own computer to get drunk and set off fireworks. That's media related. It's completely open. Because that's totally open. Most cases are completely open, so anyone can come and listen. What cases have restrictions? It's basically not allowed for the media to partially or completely cover cases involving minors. We generally prefer that these hearings are closed.
Also, in trials involving minors, there won't be a jury. It's done in front of a judge. The goal is to protect the minor, so if they make a mistake but later change, we can expunge their criminal record. It's about safeguarding the minor. There are also some cases that are particularly sensitive, like political information or state secrets. Those are a bit more serious, but that doesn't apply here. Our state government, well,
Heaves, little mushrooms, all mixed up, okay? It's unlike Florida law about foreign ownership of land that came out this year. It's kind of strange because, as a state government, they're enacting something that should only be passed by the federal government.
Right. I think the passing of this law is a very political move. As Chinese people, we obviously find it very objectionable, but even stepping outside of that perspective, this law has certain constitutional issues. That's why they're winning in court. Why? Because the ACLU is already representing the appeal. We don't know what will come of it, but it's really excessive to not allow people to buy houses or land at all.
Guaranteeing that it's very strict. And many other states have also introduced some, slightly more lenient laws, but I'm still more interested in the earlier topic about minors, especially since there's been some shocking news recently from Hebei, about 3 teenagers who did something horrifying.
Right, when you said that a criminal record can be expunged in the future, what does that mean? For example, if I steal a car now, that case will follow me for life, no matter who checks, right? Whether I'm looking for a job or applying for a loan, everyone will know I stole a car before. But for cases like this, like smaller ones, like a third-degree felony, a 14-year-old steals a car, and they only did it that one time, and they never commit another offense before they turn 18. So after he turns 18, he can go to the state government in Florida and ask if he can have this case wiped clean. This way, things like applying for student loans or jobs won't be affected. But this is only for that one time. It's about having done it just once. If there are no more offenses after that, this can allow case expungement. Okay, towing falls under criminal cases. We handle car theft cases. So in Florida, it still feels like you can't find many cases like that in California. Most of my cases were about car theft, where they drove your car away. With car theft, it's about pulling on your door handle, but then they got caught by the owner. You didn't directly steal the car, but you still can't say you're a safety tester. No, you can't. It's 18 years old, not 16. Generally, if you want to have a case expunged, it must be after you turn 18, meaning your criminal record only has that one offense before you turn 18. When I first started in the juvenile division, you mentioned that some cases can be directly transferred to the adult division if you've done a lot of bad things. If this kid is 17 and has 20 cases, he might be transferred to the adult division. This is usually a condition we negotiate with the opposing lawyer. If you plead guilty, I won't transfer you to the adult division. I'll handle it under juvenile law. The criminal law sets, as transfer to adult court could mean a long sentence. You get transferred to the adult division is up to the prosecutor. The prosecutor decides this at their discretion. I can't make that decision, but I will report to my boss, and then my boss will discuss it with me. So you can determine that a 14-year-old can be considered an adult if their crime is extremely serious. But 14 is too young, generally. For particularly severe cases, it might be 16. There isn't a clear rule on this. Regarding cases in China, like the situation in Handan, Hebei, can you compare the U.S. and China? Are there any obvious differences in how they handle juvenile crime? I don't have a professional understanding of juvenile crime in China. I only know what I've seen in the news. In the U.S., juvenile crime laws vary by state. I can only speak for Florida. I might not know much about California. So when you talk about the laws in Florida, I think their intention is to treat crime seriously, even if you're a minor. If you're of age, you should be punished harshly and arrested. It's just that your sentence might be different, and you could be held in a different facility. It's complex. If you kill 5 people, that's a serious criminal case, and I might classify you as an adult. You wouldn't be a minor. Because a kid, 14-year-old, what can they do? I've seen one true case of violent crime by 14 or 15-year-olds. Zhang San hasn't matured yet. Basically, they get a sentence. For youth, it's mostly probation. Unless you reach a certain level of severity, they won't throw you in jail. Plus, there's an awkward issue in Florida. The governor and the government are saying they want to crack down, they want to act, and they want to pull in the police. But the problem is that what they're saying is only part of it. My budget is so tight that it's affecting our juvenile detention centers, which are always full. If juvenile detention centers are always full, what happens? A lot of people end up with nowhere to send them. We used to have sentences, maybe 2 years, and we set that up, but if the detention centers are full, what do? They end up getting released early, like after 3 months. When they get released after 3 months, people dismiss it, committing bigger crimes. This is something we find very frustrating. You claim your laws are strict, but enforcement is challenging. I didn't expect this in Florida, usually seen in California news.
I didn't think to see situations like early release of violent offenders in Florida. This is what I was thinking at the time.
A major factor in deciding to leave this job is the thought of giving a criminal a conviction. It's a long process. First, you have to catch the person and gather evidence. Then you have to finalize everything for the trial. Once that's done, we have to carry it out, and it can take months to complete. After finally finishing, you have to ensure that your prosecution did everything right and that the defense attorney's representation is adequate, so there's no chance of a reversal. Ensure the judge's ruling is correct, and there's no chance of a reversal. We did everything right. It's because the government is broke. If you don't have the funds, why enforce the law? Aren't you just messing with us? You arrest someone, then release them, and I'm supposed to take you seriously? This is really disappointing for young offenders. Kids don't learn anything. They just think, oh, I got a 2-year sentence, but I was out in 3 months. It's like a doctor treating a diabetic patient, putting in a lot of effort to help them. Alright, I told him not to eat anything too sweet, and what does he do? He walks out of the hospital and buys a big tub of ice cream. After he finishes it, he realizes, hey, the doctor said if I eat ice cream, I'm gonna die. Theoretically, that's true. He said after eating it, he had a stomachache, but he kept eating. This made his condition worse. I think Florida has some issues like this. It's like your budget isn't enough, yet you're shouting slogans really loudly. The budget shouldn't just be pushed onto the government. It should be addressed by state legislation. But over there, they just won't cooperate with me. They're all at that level.
I can't say too much. Frustrating. Many prisons in the US are privately operated. Services vary. To what extent? Is it outsourced? It's hard to say. I don't know. Yeah, I really don't know. Okay, then talk about the most high-profile case you encountered while working as a prosecutor. You mentioned a lot of media attention and its social impact. The most notable case was the Parkland shooting, but I wasn't the one leading it. It was about a person who entered the school.
Then he attacked about 10 or 20 kids, and all the children died because this case was in our district. Everyone basically wanted to get involved. I was a newcomer at the time and just wanted to participate. It was a simple research task. In the end, there was first-degree murder, but they didn't give the death penalty.
Because Zhu Wu didn't get a unanimous vote for the death penalty, committed such crimes on 10 or 20 kids. What was the reason for the jury not agreeing? It could be because he claims to have mental health issues, but the jury wouldn't discuss that.
Jury deliberation, they don't disclose that. It's a bit tricky. We actually don't know the specifics. You might have some insider info, like news media or other people talking to the press, but there's no official record, so we don't know. There are several reasons why the jury might not favor the death penalty. First, many jurors are quite conservative and religious, and they inherently oppose the death penalty. If your jury is made up of people from a conservative area with a lot of religious individuals, then this means the chances of getting the death penalty are quite low. Secondly, as you mentioned earlier, mental illness plays a significant role in determining whether the death penalty is applied. A big factor is childhood trauma or past abuse. These are considered mitigating circumstances. If someone experienced these things as a child, the jury might think he was abused as a kid. I can't give him the death penalty. This is one of the factors they have to consider. At least I know from my previous cases and internships that if I shot you, it's definitely not a death penalty case. It doesn't meet the standards for it. So what are those standards? For a death penalty, the crime has to be extremely brutal, a meticulously planned murder, and it has to be a truly shocking case. These are all adjectives that describe the situation. To define it specifically, I need to look at case law and find other cases. Basically, if I just shot you dead, that's definitely not a death penalty case because it was a quick death. Like, that's not a death penalty case. It might be 25 years if it's just for killing one person, but it's not life in prison. Okay, so it's tough. Basically, they might reduce the sentence. If you don't have any priors, the sentence isn't set in stone. But if, say, I catch someone and shoot them twice in the hands, twice in the legs, whip them 20 times, and then torture them to death,
we can assess if it's a death penalty case. You heard of the case in the Chinese community in Silicon Valley, where a man killed his wife.
Right, the case is about two software engineers. I saw that the husband beat his wife to death with his bare hands. In situations like this, would it be considered abuse? If it were in Florida, it would be classified as abuse because it takes a lot of effort to kill someone with your bare hands. It's already proven that he committed murder and he doesn't have any mental illness. In this case, if you're just using the facts for sentencing, killing someone with your bare hands is quite a struggle. If the prosecution can prove that the girl was awake and that she wasn't knocked out with one punch followed by me hitting her repeatedly, then it could be argued that she felt no pain. He might say that, but if the girl struggled, for example, if there are signs of struggle on the body, like nail marks or something, or if there were screams, based on my experience, that would clearly indicate abuse. California also doesn't have the death penalty, so that's not an option there. Each state is different. The cases here might not apply over there, but if you beat someone to death with your bare hands while both of you are conscious, that's a different story.
So that would be abuse. You just mentioned the brutal methods and the negative impact and reminded me. Years ago, in the pandemic in Alabama, a student tenant killed a Chinese landlord, stabbing him many times, and it happened right in front of two small children. It was extremely brutal. He felt that the landlord was making difficulties for him, and there had been grievances along with money issues. He went to find him with a knife hidden in his bag. This wasn't a normal fight. The act was clearly premeditated. Going to find someone with a knife means this is premeditated. You don't just carry a knife around. Elaine, why don't you introduce yourself? We've been talking about the case for a while now, so let the listeners know why we invited you to record this podcast.
Hello, I'm Elaine. I'm happy to be here on Xia Shuai's podcast today. I was a prosecutor in Florida, and we got to know each other after discussing this issue. He was really interested in having me share some of my previous experiences. As the listeners know, Florida men are a very famous species, and their reputation is indeed well-deserved. They're not being unfairly judged. Today, I'm going to talk about some of my past experiences. These are personal experiences. The cases I talk about are ones you can find in the news, so there are no confidentiality issues. If anyone is interested, you can Google the keywords. You'll find more information. What made you think about becoming a prosecutor? I really liked criminal law. I studied drama in college, but it's a tough field to find working, especially in the years right after I graduated. So I thought about finding a second interest. And that's when I considered law school. Interested in criminal law. I did well and stayed at my school. I went to study law there. The main reason for becoming a prosecutor is that I really wanted to do something meaningful. I think when you study law, sure, money is one aspect, but can you use your knowledge and skills to help others? We are immigrants and international students, and we can easily be bullied in society. Sometimes, when our rights are violated, we don't have the means to protect ourselves. So, I thought that if I had the ability and experience, I could do my best to help those who are in similar situations. When I was in Miami, I experienced some discriminatory incidents. People would throw things at me, and some would yell at me on the street. I was really upset about it, so I told my advisor, and they called the police for me because throwing things at someone is a criminal act. It falls under violent crime. So my advisor helped me report it, and the police ended up arresting him. After that, the person was prosecuted and eventually pleaded guilty. This experience left me with the impression that we can protect ourselves in this society. I hope that more of my Chinese friends, whether they just arrived here or have been living here for a long time, understand that when our rights are violated, we can take action. Everyone must be aware to defend their rights, not in civil matters. If someone throws a bottle at you, they must be punished. I aspire to be a prosecutor. In the U.S. system, are there any requirements regarding identity, like needing a green card or citizenship? Well, it changes weekly. There are two types of prosecutors, federal and state. For federal positions, citizenship is required, so I couldn't apply. As for state prosecutors, it depends on the state's requirements. In New York, you need to have legal status. In California, I'm not sure about Florida, but I know it requires legal status because they don't sponsor. However, I know a girl in Arizona who told me she's also a prosecutor, and it seems they can sponsor her for something like OPT or H-1B. Each state has its own rules, so everyone needs to check for themselves. In Chinese terms, it's like foreign forces interfering with the judiciary. Right. So when you were in Florida, you were a green card holder, right? Yes, I was a green card holder. Were you studying for an LLM or a JD? A JD. Oh, I've heard that the starting salary is really low. I remember when I was in law school, there was over $50,000 a year, and when I started working, it went up to $60,000. But $60,000 isn't a great salary for living. After extra years in law school, $60,000 isn't a high salary. It might be $62,000 now, and you don't get overtime pay. You have to be on call, no overtime pay. But the health insurance is decent. They offer the best insurance available, costing you $10 or $20. Covering family, husband, kids, parents. Bill parents may pay more. You can check that, but your husband and kids are covered. But consider working as a lawyer.
You could have made that money much earlier. As a lawyer, you'd be making at least double that $60,000. When you met your colleagues, why did they choose to be ASA, assistant state attorneys, or public defenders? They could clearly be lawyers, even if they took on less popular cases. They could still earn a lot more money, way more than $50,000 or $60,000. So why do they choose to do tiring jobs in the system with low pay? Working in the system in the US is less appealing than in China. It's a big difference. Firstly, the reason for my colleagues is that they really do have a passion for criminal law and for justice.
If you don't have that passion, you wouldn't even step into this field. Because it requires a lot of energy, it's a tough job. This group of people truly has a passion for judicial fairness. If you look at their backgrounds, many come from immigrant families or are what we call underprivileged, because they might have faced injustice when they were younger. Or like me, I want to protect people who are in similar situations. That's a driving force for them. What's the second point? You can't rely only on that passion for the long haul. The second point is student loans. That's a huge motivator for people to stay. If your passion brings you in, then student loans are what keeps you there. If you work as a public defender or in the state attorney's office for 10 years, your student loans will be waived or canceled. Many people might owe 200,000 to 300,000 starting from undergrad and continuing through law school. If you don't have a scholarship, you really can't save up on your own salary along the way. Working for 10 years to have your housing loan waived is actually a pretty good deal if you have a lot of loans. But if you put it that way, Biden waiving a lot of student loans is like destroying the foundation, right? It's not like he's waiving that many loans. It seems pretty limited. I haven't paid attention to this. I've heard people talk about it. They might let you pause payments for now, but eventually you'll still have to pay up later.
Yeah, so if you haven't written off your loans for over 10 years, you might have to get them waived. And if you have good connections locally, that could help.
As a former prosecutor, a ticket to enter politics. It's basically your entry pass to become a local politician. 10 years later, I ran for judge. In Florida, local judges are elected, a makeshift campaign. Then you can run for local judge, run for mayor or governor. Starting from the grassroots gives you something to talk about. Most people probably don't have those kinds of connections. Yeah, you can become a judge, but if you want to move up in terms of policy, you might need more. Who's that? Our current VP, oh right, Kamala Harris. She comes from a prosecutor background, right? Law and order in San Francisco, right?
Right. I forgot about the LV in San Francisco, which has a bad reputation now, but it used to be pretty good. Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, right? Yeah, he was great too. He was a prosecutor in New York before running for mayor.
His reputation now, it's a shame. New York might need someone like Jordana. Cities go through cycles. You know, they have good times and bad times. Good times and bad times. How long did he serve back then? About 6 months. I officially worked as a prosecutor for 6 months. But before that, I spent over a year in school, doing an internship there. Yeah, that's right, an internship.
Basically, it was over a year. Then I worked full-time for another 6 months. Right? Right. Which area was that? Can you describe it for everyone? It was in South Florida, around Miami. Yeah. Can you share some experiences? Even though you have a lot of experience, were there any cases that shocked you or left a deep impression?
So in Florida, someone beat up an alligator, and I don't know why. This case, I started early on, involved a guy who caught an alligator, beat it up, and then put it in his car, and he got arrested by the police. The story itself is pretty mundane. But when the police opened the trunk, they likely panicked, because they might have thought it was a kidnapping. Who would keep such a creature in their trunk? My colleague mentioned a guy who attacked a peacock just to get its feathers. Those are some pretty bizarre cases. Cruel cases don't fit well, but an alligator really matches the stereotype of Floridians, like pigs and dogs. They have their own interests. This might sound a bit off-putting to some, so I won't go into detail, but there are people with some pretty strange hobbies. After I posted about it, Saya Hongshu sent me a rose. I won't say much about that rose. If you're interested, you can look it up yourself. Alright, it's about animals and things that are hard to describe. Yeah, someone called the police on a guy for abusing an alligator. That's pretty much it. Some people even post about it on social media, which I really don't understand. Why would you share that while committing a crime? They might not understand the idea of making money quietly. A lot of times, the most direct evidence we have comes from the criminals themselves. Some even post, "Guess who I just killed?" They share it from the crime scene. It's public, no need to file documents, just screenshot. Instagram's review is fast. If the review process were like that of Zaya Hangshu, you wouldn't have any evidence. It's true, so we have to thank Instagram for that. There are some regulars in court that we follow, not really follow, but we keep an eye on them to see how they're doing lately since they don't set their accounts to private. Oh, you really do that? I really do, because sometimes these examples come straight from them. Like they sell drugs and post a public story on Instagram with little baggies. So when I see it, the police see it too. They follow the person's Instagram when making arrests. Now it's all about TikTok. Wow, this reminds me of a joke about someone in China who was in various WeChat groups saying he was selling white sugar powder.
Then the guy asks you to post and says it's costly white sugar powder, costs about 5,000 for a small bag. Finally, he actually sent someone a bag of sugar, inhalable white sugar powder. It's sugar. It's sugar. Don't worry, I am selling sugar powder, as I said, but that's pretty much the gist of it. I forgot why it shut down, but it wasn't for drug trafficking, just skirting edges. Have you ever dealt with cases like those big drug lords we see in movies? Those are top-tier cases. At that time, I hadn't reached that level. I was just handling second or third-tier cases. Yeah, it also depends on your experience.
My supervisor handles first-degree felonies, while I handle second- and third-degree cases, including juvenile offenses, domestic violence, and DV. When you start, you deal with misdemeanors, minor crimes, or domestic violence. Since we're really short-staffed, everyone has to touch on every area except for the first-degree stuff. Because first-degree cases are more serious, and there aren't many, you don't need to over-specialize. One can manage. You should specialize, but if you don't have the staff, it's unavoidable. How many ASAs do you have in your office? Theoretically, you should have 100 or 200, but we don't have enough people. Some AICs don't do any work. They sick, especially higher-level ones. Us line prosecutors, we're the ones doing the work. So there aren't that many of us. 100 is the max, but you have so many cases, so how busy are you every day? I usually get in around 7 in the morning and work until 9 at night, then I might keep working at home. I even work on weekends. It's a big workload. I don't think it's as extreme as some others, but when you factor in our pay, that formula gets pretty wild. Okay, now you've moved on to a big firm as a lawyer. So, it's easier to manage since you may have those early and late hours, but they pay you. During my internship, the workload was heavy. I interned at the public defender's office, and I think the workload there is different from that at the prosecutor's office. The workload at the public defender's office is heavy due to many cases, while at the prosecutor's office, it's heavy due to responsibilities. Besides legal duties, I also have to handle secretarial tasks, scanning 200+ pages of documents. Many administrative duties exist as part of the government. You have to make calls to various departments. Mornings are in court, so calls must be done beforehand. So, you get there at around 7, and you spend 2 hours making calls. After that, you go to court and then work with the court. Today, I handle this case, and tomorrow I ask, can I move this case? I need to figure out which evidence to present and work with the police and different departments. Some tasks aren't ours, but without funding, you end up doing them anyway. We have 20 lawyers sharing one secretary who can't handle it all, so we all pitch in. That's pretty much the daily grind, a different kind of busy, but government work feels more fragmented.
If I could choose, I would say go for it. If you're interested in criminal law and want to work more, with public defenders, we are the prosecutors. Prosecutors represent the government in criminal cases. Public defenders are essentially there to help with the defense.
They help those so-called suspects defend themselves, but these people are also part of your government. They are government personnel, essentially.
They provide free lawyers, right? If your income is below a certain level, you can't afford a lawyer, so the public defender is your lawyer. What I find a bit sinister is that you all are part of the same department. Even though legally you are separate, you still speak for the suspects while you represent the victims, or say, the police talk. But once you're out of court, you all are colleagues in the same office building. Some cases might just have an unspoken understanding, or maybe they write things down privately. Is that how it works? Many cases can be negotiated privately. This plea agreement is a guilty plea. The vast majority of cases are resolved through negotiation, probably about 95%. If you had to put a number on it, most are settled through negotiation. As for the relationship with PDs, it can be tough to work with them. I'm pretty lucky. My PD is great. So what makes a good PD? Theoretically, there are 3 judges, 2 PDs, and 1 judge. Right now, there's 1 judge, 1 PD, and 1 prosecutor. But when we're discussing a case, the evidence on both sides is the same. There's no discrepancy. I said, I'm keeping a little surprise for you, but that doesn't exist. So he knows how his case is going, and I know how mine is going. When my case is weak or his case is weak, we definitely need to plead. If you don't plead, you're in trouble. The other side is definitely going to win. Isn't that just wasting everyone's time? Basically, if you have a good relationship with your PD, it's actually a good thing. Why? Because we can communicate directly, I can lay out my terms, this is my final offer. Ultimately, I can only give you 6 months of probation. That's the best deal the prosecution can offer you. We don't have to wait a few days. Hey, let me discuss this with you. We can negotiate a bit, and you can resolve this matter directly. That way the efficiency goes up, right? Your case can move faster. And then more cases can be heard. Because honestly, when I started, I still had a lot of pre-COVID cases. Like the cases from 2019 and 2021 and 2022, your case was stuck. No ruling was possible. Many plea agreements exist, and most prefer to plea. Many PDs are skilled and responsible. I have a good relationship with this prosecutor, so I'll sell out my client. I need to fight for my client's interests. If the prosecution's case is weak, regardless of our relationship, we still have to go to battle.
That's what being professional is all about. It sounds interesting. There's a kind of unspoken understanding among colleagues that we need to get the case through. However, at the same time, there are certain professional ethics. It's not like I can just push things through for the sake of it.
To close a case, I wouldn't sell out my client. For people in the PD profession, if there are still some in the prosecution who have a desire for power, being a PD is truly about doing it for the love of the job. They genuinely have a passion for the justice system. Many times, their alma maters are actually better than those of the prosecutors, they just love what they do. There's no hierarchy of disdain, but if you just look at everyone's resumes, my PDs might. Their abilities are quite strong. Listeners, if you find yourself in court and assigned a PD due to some issues, make sure to communicate well with your PD. Most PDs are actually pretty good. Their only problem is that they have too many cases and can't focus. It could be 300 to 400 cases a year, or they might be juggling 300 to 400 cases at the same time. Having 300 to 400 open cases is just how it is for them. When I first started, I had over 250 cases, and later on, it got to the point where I couldn't even count them anymore. Prosecutors also have hundreds of cases, and managing so many at once makes it pretty reactive. I really want to do a good job, and I want to handle each case well. But the reality is that I have 50 cases to handle in a day. For each case, I might only be able to give it 10 to 15 minutes, which is already pushing my limits. There's just no way around it. I really want to see each case through from start to finish, but not every case is one that you take over from the beginning. I have some very old cases that might have been handled by several previous prosecutors, so when they come to me, I have to review them all over again. There aren't many cases you can see through from beginning to end. If a case has always been mine, it would follow me through. I might do really well, which is good for me and for the client, but the case doesn't follow the person. PDs typically have more cases than we do. On the other hand, private defense attorneys might only have a dozen cases, so they can make more money regardless. But with a PD, it's not guaranteed. Usually, the PD will contact you the day before your court appearance. I think about my podcast, for example. Right now, I'm recording this podcast with you, and I've already edited or am in the process of editing 2 episodes while we're doing this.
Then I might have 4 more scheduled. After this, I feel like having 4 or 5 open cases in my pipeline is already a lot for me and takes up a good amount of time. I'm not particularly good at multitasking. If I were to follow my previous work style, I'd probably focus on one case at a time for a while, then move on to the next. So for you all, having hundreds on your plate is quite something.
That's really respectful. Thank you. Actually, you can get used to it. At first, it's completely overwhelming, and it can be confusing because you have so many cases. A lot of people have similar names, they look alike, and their clothing styles are similar too.
But after a while, you get used to it and start to understand who's who. And what about your case files? There are hundreds or even thousands of pages of evidence and documents. Do you go through them page by page? How do you manage to get through all that without working overtime?
You focus on the most important key points, right? When I get a new case, I have a responsibility and obligation to thoroughly review all the evidence I have on hand because some of it might contain information and details that can't be shared with the other side, like the informant's address and such. I have to redact that, so I need to go through it page by page. It's my duty, and I have to do it carefully and thoroughly. For example, if you haven't dealt with a discovery case before, you might not need to go through every page in detail, but I still do because you never know what information you might need. And meticulously. You might need all of their records. Your English is excellent. Thanks for reading.
This has its reasons. Reading training is like when we used to learn ICT 1. You'd be stuck in the mountains for 2 months, and all we wrote were if-else statements and print functions. The real money-making professions are like that. The ones not making money are a bunch of people standing behind someone waving a flag while they sign something. That's where the money is.
That's a solid career path. What's the longest case file you've seen? Give me a shocker. I'd say it was about 5 or 6 centimeters thick, probably around 600 to 700 pages for the audience. But I specifically remember it being marked as over 600 pages. There's a bunch at the back that aren't marked, but some of those are duplicates and you might skip a few dozen pages. Then there are images, which are fine like image records, but the main focus is on the testimonies and police reports. Those are the things I absolutely have to review. For serious cases, does seeing so much of this stuff affect your mind and body? Definitely does. When I was interning in defense working on death penalty cases, I found that I really didn't want to eat meat. Just looking at a whole chicken made me uncomfortable because some criminals handle bodies in ways that are just like how they process chickens in the supermarket.
AI products often claim to have made groundbreaking advancements in law. Have you felt that yourself? Whether it's from your time as a prosecutor to now as a lawyer, or from criminal law to tax law, have you noticed any benefits from tech products in your work? Yes, definitely. There are many tasks that you can let AI handle directly. For those smaller drafts, AI can replace humans. I even think AI does tax law better than people do because tax law is all about logic.
Well, the thing is, for many of your cases, you might need to access resources like Westlaw, and you have to pay for that subscription. AI doesn't have that access, so there are things it just can't do. If AI could connect to those resources, I believe it could definitely outperform me. But AI can't commit fraud, right? Maybe you could have a chat with AI, let it learn deeply, and it wouldn't have to serve time. But if the CEO and CTO of that product end up in jail, well, that's a different story. Still, as tax lawyers, you guys have to take responsibility, right? The joke is that AI can't replace a person in serving time, so
Tax lawyers are still useful. I'm curious what you think.
do you have to take responsibility, or is it really up to the client to pay? For example, if we give a not-so-great piece of advice, it could definitely damage the company's reputation. But as lawyers, we're advisory. I just say what I think, and whether you listen or not is up to you. Exactly. And with tax planning like ours, the worst that can happen is getting fined by the IRS. We're not essentially committing any criminal acts. If there's an audit, it might just be that our own skills aren't up to par. If you're selling powdered sugar, you might want to sell powdered sugar too, but our taxes are really complicated. You can only give a safe recommendation, and if there's an audit, that situation is really beyond our control. Our advice is just our professional opinion. Maybe my expertise isn't the best, but I truly have no bad intentions. Have you ever had a case where your legal responsibilities conflicted with your personal ethics, causing a real struggle? Yes, there are cases where I didn't want to file a lawsuit. Well, in the next episode, let's talk about some specific details. We won't mention any names, but just to give you a situation. In a domestic violence case, we encountered a big, burly guy who claimed a 12 or 13-year-old was abusing him. But as we dug deeper, we found out that this man was actually the boyfriend of the child's mother, and he often bullied the child and his younger siblings. So the child, not being able to stand it anymore, ended up hitting him. The child threw something at him, and then he called the police, saying he felt wronged. The problem with cases like this is that all the elements of a crime are present. When we prosecute, we don't look at anything else. We only consider the criminal factors. We check each box. Is there intent? Is there contact? Was it intentional? Did it cause injury? If all these elements are met, I don't have the right to decide not to prosecute. But for me, I feel like you're just a bad person for bullying a child. What's wrong with a child protecting their younger siblings? Isn't this a case of self-defense? Self-defense is a claim that the opposing party can assert in a face-to-face situation. I think they could argue this way, and I believe they could win the case, depending on the circumstances, in about 3 to 6 months. This child can't go to school properly. He might carry this case with him for the rest of his life because he was indeed arrested. I don't want to rush this situation, but there's not much I can do. The best I can offer him is a better plea deal because, legally speaking, there is indeed an issue here. Plus, there are other complicated family dynamics at play, so there's really no need for such severe actions. But the law is written this way, and you have to understand that prosecuting such a serious crime makes me uncomfortable. I feel it's unnecessary. I don't know if you've seen something during the new year.
In the 20th episode, it discussed a self-defense situation, but in the end, because it's a film, the prosecutor said, "I've decided not to prosecute. This should be considered self-defense, and there shouldn't even be a prosecution. However, based on your work experience in Florida, if it truly checks out."
Should be prosecuted, but the defense attorney can operate in a certain way. However, prosecution is still necessary, right? Yes, in our office, each office has different policies. Because you have a state attorney for the whole state. If that state attorney is tough on crime, they'll make you check all the boxes before proceeding with the case. Some might not have that option. They might just say, I won't prosecute this one, and I won't prosecute that one. So our discretion as line prosecutors is very limited. I can't decide whether to prosecute or not. I can only express my concerns. I can talk to my supervisor about it and say I don't think it should go forward, but the supervisor will tell me that the office policy is what it is. We can't make exceptions like that, so they say, this is what you can do. It's about clarifying things with the opposing attorney. We definitely have sympathy for first-time offenders. We certainly don't want to be harsh on them. So what can you do and what can I do? I might offer you something a bit lighter. And if you don't offend again, this can be expunged. There are morally complex situations like this, and other things I feel shouldn't be prosecuted where I think the law is wrong. For example, let's say hypothetically, if a seller sells a house to a Chinese person, or if that Chinese person refuses to sell their property or refuses to leave, then we could prosecute you. From my perspective, I strongly disagree. Some laws are just wrong. I think the biggest lesson I've learned while working in law in the US is to be critical of the legal system. I mean specifically the American legal system, because the legislation is very flexible. They pass one law, then another. So, who are the people in the state legislature? Many people in the state legislature may not even have qualifications as high as mine, but we have to listen to them. A lot of their ideas are outdated. For example, our procedures are very strict. In court, I currently can't share my video with the other party using a USB drive. I have to use a CD or a videotape before I can share anything, because these lawmakers won't change. They're too lazy to make changes, so we have to deal with these things. We really need to be aware of some limitations of the law. And the lagging nature of the law, aside from issues like those faced by Chinese people, for example, I think some crimes shouldn't be treated lightly. I'm a very acquisitive person, and since we're assuming you're a very generous person, what crimes do you think shouldn't be punished so lightly? I think drug dealing shouldn't be a minor offense, right? Now, sentencing seems much more flexible. They might give you a few years, maybe even 10 years, or they might not sentence you at all. Okay, but you still feel like a few years or even 10 years is still too light. A few years or 10 years isn't much, right? There are cases of large-scale drug trafficking, but they can still get off lightly. I have a friend whose boyfriend was American. They were together for 7 or 8 years, and then he overdosed and died. I was really shocked that there wasn't even a little investigation into where he got the drugs or the circumstances around it. Because that drug definitely had issues. They say the amount was small, but still, with that kind of drug trafficking, you can ruin someone's family. They only have one child. But I think in America, maybe because I'm Chinese, we have an instinctive aversion to drugs. However, I've noticed that here, the public's desire to combat drug abuse isn't as strong.
Well, the law makes it even harder for you. I have another question about what you just said. 95% of cases reach a plea agreement. That's a pretty high percentage, maybe even 92%. Suspects reach plea agreements to get reduced sentences. Isn't that a form of injustice? Because when I think about the case of Zhang Yingying, her body was never found, right? Later, I saw a news report saying that in court documents, Christensen mentioned he wanted to reveal the location where he disposed of the body in exchange for a reduced sentence, but the prosecutor refused to agree to that. So it means no agreement was reached. I want to ask, from your own personal perspective, why choose to plead, and do you think this plea agreement is often, in your opinion, from your point of view, an unjust thing, or can we not say it's completely wrong? This issue of plea agreements, for instance, is it really a minor matter?
If I pull the car door handle, and you don't admit, you might spend 6 months. If you admit, it could be 3 months. For a 4-month sentence for the same charge in these minor cases, it's very small, but your judicial resources are limited. If you put all your judicial resources into minor cases, I won't give you any leeway at all, and I won't allow big cases to be handled. No one will deal with murder and robbery. There won't be any rapes. No one will handle that. Why are your resources just not enough? Do you know how much preparation you need to go to court? Do you know about your witnesses and all these things? For one court appearance, it might take me 2 hours, and that's for a minor case. For major cases, the trial might last several days. So in a way, I see plea agreements as small cases serving larger ones. I don't want to say that we should just rely on legal formalities. Of course I want to. Right now, the policy basically encourages pleas and these plea agreements. After that, we can include compensation for the victims in the plea agreement because, going to court you might also lose. You can't say that I will definitely win by going to court. Sometimes, in my case, I know I'm missing an important witness, and the other side knows I'm missing an important witness too. Either I go to court and lose the case directly, in front of the jury, and we get nothing. He continues to walk the streets. Some people don't want to go through all that, prefer pleading guilty and requesting leniency. In that situation, that's acceptable. As with the Zhang Yingying case, I support prosecution. It must not be allowed. But when you say no to that person, the risk for the prosecution is that I might lose the entire case, because you never know what the jury is thinking. You know, the jury is a very random selection. I think the hardest part of my job is selecting the jury because this group of people is chosen randomly. And their education, knowledge, background, personality, are they racist? Do they dislike women? Do they just find me annoying? All these factors will influence how they vote for him. It's just too unstable and uncertain. So, you can only look at their demographics to see what ethnicity or gender they are, but we don't really know, and we can question that. This is why selecting a jury is so difficult. You have to be able to tell a story and ask questions. Okay. When the public defender and I bring these people into the room, we start discussing the case. And asking questions. We won't go into too many facts, we present some hypotheticals. For example, I might say, everyone raise your hand if you've lost a loved one due to drug use. That's the kind of person I want. The other side doesn't want them. Because this is a drug trafficking case, I have to continue asking questions. So for this jurisdiction, I need to prepare my questions very carefully. I can't be too blunt, but I also can't be too vague. I know all their information, so the selected individuals have to be agreed upon by both of you.
Or do we both agree?
We both have veto power, so I need to reach a consensus with the public defender or the opposing lawyer, who could be either a public defender or a private one. We need to agree on what kind of people we want. Can this process drag on forever? If he keeps vetoing you and you keep vetoing him, the judge is going to get mad at us. You know, it can't just keep dragging on like this.
He'll start cursing you in the group chat, saying things like, "I'll get you. You might be stuck in a standoff for a while, but there's no way to escape. Have you ever faced danger? It's because you deal with a lot of violent people. For example, if a criminal gets out or if their family tries to threaten you, asking you to go easy on them. Have you ever encountered that kind of danger? I've had victims curse at me before."
Oh, the victims, that's the key. The suspects are actually not that significant. The victims get really angry. We actually won the case, but I can understand him. Why? Because he lost money. But the thing is, the person who committed the robbery didn't have any money either. So we can only give him a court order saying he has to pay back money every month after he gets out. Right, there's also a plea agreement. If he doesn't stay in for too long, he can still get out and pay back the money, right? He can continue working to pay it back, and the victim is really happy. I lost money, and what good does it do if you win? You can't get the money back for me. Can the government provide compensation? Hey, would you ask him? Do you want him to stay in prison forever? Or do you want him to get out and help you earn back your money?
You would ask, and this is also about us. If he willingly says, "I don't want money, I just want him to do it," and he does it for 3 years, but then he's still not happy, it can end up like that.
Then you can choose, okay? I've been chased and attacked by a suspect in court before. I can understand being angry, but what I don't get is why the court officers didn't stop him. Everything else was fine because honestly our contact with the defendant isn't that frequent. One of the rights protected by the Constitution is that he has a lawyer, so we can only talk to his lawyer. So we mostly interact with the lawyer, our contact with the defendant isn't much. Maybe just a brief cross-examination in court, discussing a few questions. If you think about all the cases you've handled, do you feel like there are any major bugs in the American legal system? First of all, this system moves really slowly. It's all fragmented and very detailed. Your advantage might be that it's hard to have this kind of right. Corruption makes it tough to have rights without abuse. I want to stretch this out, but after you break it down so finely, it also makes it hard to get things done. I want to change something because I think those certain things are not functioning effectively. The lag in the law is actually quite serious. As for other specific things, I feel like the legislative, judicial, and enforcement departments sometimes operate independently. The laws passed by the legislature and what the Supreme Court debates often can't be implemented at our particular trial level. The issues you guys are changing are different from ours, like gun rights. The Second Amendment gives the right to bear arms. So what's the mainstream debate? The Constitution says we are born free, we must resist tyranny, and we should always keep guns in our hands. Let's not even talk about whether having a gun is useful against the government's advanced bombing technology. Let's set that aside and not mention it. The problem is that the gun rights you want to protect, when they come to our county, people just want to hold a gun to set off fireworks. They aren't really concerned about their constitutional rights. They just want to use the gun for fireworks, not to resist the government. It's just for fun. He might be trying to annoy his brother or scare the neighbor's kids. Sometimes it feels like the legal subject has nothing to do with me, but the conclusions you reach at the end don't really relate to me either.
How exactly should we struggle, or how should we struggle based on your previous statement about the House of Representatives? They do it every day. However, over there, everyone seems to be under a lot of pressure. As a former practitioner and an observer, it sounds like you all are bearing too much of this pressure. The dignity of the law may not be upheld at the level of enforcement.
Complete respect if it's a lack of money or a lack of people. The lack of people is also due to a lack of money. I think you're completely right, but over on the legislative side, they don't care about us. There's some politicians who need attention, and when they discuss the law, they're more concerned about whether they can speak on this issue. But when it comes to actual execution, it has nothing to do with them at all, not even a little. I'm still pretty disappointed because the prosecutor is the one enforcing the law. I don't have the right to say I question the law, and I don't have the right to refuse to enforce it. At one point, it almost got my partner suspended. If you don't do it, you might lose your law license.
So you have no choice but to say I don't agree, but I have to draw from your rich experiences reading case files with suspects, and your experiences in court, as well as your battles of wits with them. How do you think a girl out in the world can protect herself against all these various ill-intentioned people? Your answer to this question might be more fitting than many others.
From my experience, first, let's talk about strangers. For example, many people are looking for partners using dating apps. Remember to always meet in a public place with lots of people, preferably during the day. I know places like parks are great for this. Going for a walk is very cheap. And coffee shops might not be everyone's favorite, but for a first date, my suggestion, based on my work experience, is that there are indeed people who commit crimes in these dating situations. In my experience, during the day, choose a public place for a date where you can easily leave if needed, like a coffee date. You can chat for 2 hours or just 15 minutes. If something feels off in a crowded cafe, just turn around and walk away. If he wants to do something to you, it's broad daylight with people around, so he likely won't because we do have some. Well, he may look like a very attractive man, but he could actually be a killer. This is a real case. So everyone must not let their guard down. This might be my PTSD talking, but you really have to be careful. On a first date, especially with strangers, even if it's someone you know, always choose a place with lots of people during the day where you can easily leave if needed. Once you like him, then you can eat, right? Once you know this person and feel safe, then it's fine to have a more expensive dinner. But on the first date, safety comes first. Also, when you go out, keep an eye on your drink. This is a common piece of advice. At first I thought, oh, you're talking about cups and drinks. But if you want to go to the restroom, like when I go to a bar to drink and I want to head to the bathroom, you'd better finish your drink. If you're alone, make sure to drink it up. Or ask the bartender to hold it for you. Don't leave it on the table. I used to think that was unlikely, but there are indeed cases of people getting drugged. This is advice from the prosecutor. Everyone should be extremely cautious about cases of drugging. It's very likely to happen when you leave, especially in tourist cities or small towns. I know this might definitely sound a bit cowardly, but if something happens, everyone should run, and not try to be brave with words. This is advice for girls. If I assume you're alone or with another girl, don't engage. If you can clearly feel a difference in size or strength between you two, don't let your pride get in the way. Don't confront someone just to save face or prove a point, because some people can be really ruthless. Safety first, just run away and deal with it later. If they say a lot of disrespectful things to you, record it and report it. We've been taught since childhood that boys shouldn't hit girls. It doesn't cost you anything to let it slide. But many thugs on the street, or those who seem well off and elite, can be very brutal. Although this isn't a feel-good story, safety comes first, especially when we're out and about. Another point is to avoid posting too much information on social media. It's fine to post a picture when you're out enjoying yourself, but don't reveal too much. If your photo clearly shows your home address, personal details, or any distinctive landmarks, that's a big no-no. I know sometimes people, after you pass your driving test and are excited to show off your license, remember to blur out your number and address. It's these little things that help protect your privacy. I've also dealt with cases of stalking where people found information online. As for other things, I think that's about all we can do. With crime, it often comes down to luck. Sometimes, even in broad daylight, you might still get attacked or robbed. I haven't personally experienced this, but I've heard of cases in grocery stores where someone just randomly got beaten up because the attacker felt like it. In situations like that, there's not much you can do. We should avoid bad neighborhoods. And try not to get into someone else's car if you're not familiar with them. Take the case of Zhang Yingying. We saw it in the news. She actually knew the person. Or at least she was aware of who they were. It's not like she had never met them. So this is a really sad situation. When it comes to incidents like this in a car, you can't just run away.
When you get in the car with someone, you go wherever they take you. You can't just run away. So it's best to ride with someone you know. We're grateful for our guest today, writer Xiao Shuai, who will share his experiences as a prosecutor in Florida. We hope some final tips can be helpful.
Friends, when you're out and about, make sure to protect yourself, safeguard your money, and ensure your personal safety. Also, thanks to Xiao Shuai for this opportunity.
Alright, thank you.